Hello class, here are my responses to the questions at the end of chapter 20 that dealt all with the death penalty. And so the first question is, what are the main or strongest arguments for and against the death penalty? Well, to me, the strongest arguments for and against the death penalty both have to deal with the moral implications of killing someone for killing someone, as opposed to the utilitarian or deterrence-based arguments. So the moral argument for the death penalty is that for someone who takes another person's life, it is our moral obligation to punish them in equal proportion, that is, kill them. And to not do that would be a moral crime, that you do it not because you think you're going to get something out of it. That is, it's not going to deter anybody. People who make the retributive moral argument are not concerned with that. In fact, they see that as being kind of ghoulish, that you think that, okay, by using this person as an example, by killing this person, we are going to make other people, other would-be murderers, think another way. Well, they don't like that, and I also find that a little unsettling that we're using a person's murder as a means to an end. But we also can see a moral argument against the death penalty, that it is simply wrong for the government to participate in intentionally killing of a person, because that is, after all, the reason why there's justification for executing somebody. It's premeditated murder. So again, the people that make the moral argument, and again, I think you're on stronger ground here, is that they are not concerned at all of whether or not there's any utility to the death penalty. That is, they're not concerned whether or not the death penalty deters. In fact, best evidence suggests that there is no, at least statistically detectable, deterrent effect of the death penalty. But for the moralists, for the retributivists, and I guess I'll put myself in this camp on this one, that's not the point. The point here is that the government shouldn't be doing it because it's simply morally wrong to commit premeditated murder. Okay? So yeah, personally, I think the retributive arguments or the moral-based arguments are always a little bit more sound than these utilitarian or deterrence-based arguments because they are using a person as a means to an end, which is, well, morally problematic. Okay, second issue, or second question. Which legal issues should the Supreme Court scrutinize as being in violation of the Eighth Amendment? Well, when it comes to the death penalty, I would say that because of its use being arbitrary and capricious, that is, it's not used consistently for similar murders within states, and its use definitely varies between states because not all states have the death penalty. It cannot be, therefore, the usual thing. The language taken from the Eighth Amendment, protections against cruel and unusual punishments. And then secondly, if we take a look at the most common way in which the government kills people, they use lethal injection, a chemical injection. And I find this absolutely horrifying compared to like a firing squad or a guillotine. I don't know about you folks, but if I could have my choice as to how I'm going to be offed, I would much rather be shot in the chest or have my head lopped off than have some chemical injected into me where I possibly might suffer, suffocate, and experience just the most excruciating pain because I'm suffocating, but yet I can't do anything about it, kick around and foam at the mouth and all that, as opposed to just having my head shut off or just having somebody shoot me in the chest. I mean, you're going to get hit so hard, you won't even know what hit you, and the lights will be out. You get hit with a guillotine or be shot right in the chest, as opposed to chemicals. It's bloody chemicals. No way. So that to me, that would suggest that the death penalty as it's used today with lethal injection is unnecessarily cruel as compared to something like, well, what the French had and what they thought was actually humanitarian advancement was the guillotine. And firing squad is, again, still I think it's not nearly as as cruel. So we have problems with the death penalty. It might be violating the Eighth Amendment because of it not necessarily satisfying the usual and cruel components of that amendment. It's violating them. Okay, why do people in the U.S. continue to support the death penalty? Well, yeah, this topic comes up ever so often, why the U.S. sort of stands out and as an exception in a bad way from other countries with whom we share similar governments and similar values. Why do we have the death penalty and they do not? Are they people in Western Europe and Canada, are they morally superior to us? I don't think so. I think what's going on here, I think the graph makes it quite clear, is that the U.S. just has higher rates of homicide than all of these other countries. And you look at the graphic on the lower right-hand side, you can see that the U.S. just towers above these other countries in terms of its homicide rate. We just have more murderers running around committing more murders than what you have in these other countries. And also support for the death penalty does seem to track pretty well with the homicide rate. As you can see, the homicide rate has declined in recent years according to the graph, and the support for it continues to decline. Although this graph only goes to 2010, it does continue to decline. The support, actual support for the death penalty also has declined. So the homicide rate tracks pretty well with support for the death penalty. So as the homicide rate declines, the support for the death penalty also declines. And so I think that does explain much of our differences between Canada and Western Europe. It's not that these places are morally superior, or does it have to do with race or poverty? All those arguments to me are not nearly as convincing, and they lack the kind of empirical evidence that we would want to make that kind of argument. I think it has a lot to do with just the higher homicide rates in the U.S. and people responding to that in kind with more death to the murderers. Okay. The fourth question, what alternatives are there to the death penalty? Okay, so if we are squeamish about murdering murderers, what do we do with these people? After all, they've committed heinous crimes. Well, there has been a lot of consensus on this, and the consensus is that, well, we will use LWOP instead. That is life without the possibility of parole. Just put them in the jail and throw away the key. Lock them up and throw away the key. However, what has been noticed with this trend is that this has led to an increased use of LWOP for violent offenses which would have never warranted the use of the death penalty in the past. So while there is a decreasing popularity or in support for the death penalty, decreasing levels of use of the death penalty, what has happened in its place is that there has been rising rates of LWOP for violent offenses. And so this is yet another example of this net widening effect, where you have these unintended consequences in this case, where people want to do the more humane thing and not put people to death. But what has happened is that now people that are charged and sentenced because of violent offenses, they are more likely now to get life without the possibility of parole than what has happened in the past.